fine. So I want to give you a little overview of how I'm hopeful that this afternoon will run so that you have an idea of who's going to be speaking next, and I think it'll also be very helpful for our speakers who have been informed in advance. So first I wanted to let you know that we hope to end promptly at 5, so we're going to do our best with timing. And I have the unfortunate responsibility I made these beautiful signs to my panelists. So I don't like it, but it's done with love. Is to tell you that you'll have 5 minutes left, 1 minute left, and we really thank you, but you're done. And I'm looking at you, Bernard.
I know.
Looking at Bernard.
Those of you who are at the MLK event know that that is an issue.
I didn't say it, he did. So I made these signs, so I'm hopeful that we'll move this along. So first I want to say, this forum was organized many months ago, and it was done by a very large group of dedicated people, or in some ways a small group of very dedicated people. I want to acknowledge our planning committee members. Michael Boza, Carol Cara. Oh, who whistled? I like that. Myself, Patty Correa. Hey, she's in back. Wait. Sarah Johnson. Paula Cannanow. Joan Mahone. Charles Osborne. Richard Segan, who I actually really think organized the whole thing. Richard. Enid Shapiro. Yay. Peter Stringham. Peter. And Susan Ziegler. Yay. Waving. Okay, so many thanks. Now, there's many people who are involved in co-sponsoring this, and we are so thankful to make this happen. Alianza Central Americana. Yay. Louder, I'm so sorry. If I'm closer, I will stand really close. All Saints Parish. Boston's Workmen's Circle. Brookline Adult and Community Education. The Brookline Community Foundation. The Brookline Community Mental Health Center. The Brookline Department of Public Health. Brookline Interactive Group with the cameras in the back, thank you. And you can view this often and share with neighbors online soon at brooklineinteractive.org. The Brookline Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations with our director, Dr. Jelena. Brookline PACS. Chobe Hoy Real Estate Associates. Chobe, she is here. The First Parish of Brookline. The League of Women Voters of Brookline. I see our chair, Margaret, and Betsy DeWitt, our vice chair, is here as well, and a whole row of members. They are here in crowd. The Massachusetts Jaws with Justice. St. Mary's of Assumption Parish with Father Brian Clarity is here. He's here. St. Paul's Episcopal Church. Temple Ohobai Shalom. Temple Sinai. And United Parish of Brookline. We also cannot underscore enough the Brookline Senior Center. Thank you so much for being here. Julie Washburn got here a million hours ago, and all these chairs were placed out and everything else. So thank you so much, Julie, and the Brookline Senior Center. And thank you to each of you for coming. So I'm going to try to do this really quickly and very closely and loudly. Okay? Feel free to say, I can't hear you. So we're going to start very soon with Ava Malona. We are so thankful to have you here. She is so amazing, and she is here from the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. She is their executive director. Thank you. She is here, and MIRA is the state's largest organization representing the foreign born. She is also co-chair of the National Partnership for New Americans, which is the lead organization focusing on immigrant integration. So we are so thankful to have you. Thank you for your Sunday afternoon. And then after Ava, she'll come to the podium and speak. I'll do my little sign, and then she'll sit down. Then Bernard. Oh, Bernard. Bernard will come and hopefully quickly speak. He is a member of our esteemed Brookline Board of Selectmen. We have some
You would
here as
think I
well.
have some power to speak longer because of that.
Sorry. I know that Selectman Neil Washinsky is here, and Selectman Ben Franco are also here, and I apologize if I miss anyone. And Nancy is here too. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nancy Daly, as well. Bernard is a member of the Brookline Board of Selectmen. He has lived in Brookline since 2003, and he is married with 2 adult children. He graduated from Swarthmore College and Boston College Law School, and so we are thankful. He will be here also, and he will speak briefly. Oh, really quickly, so Ava will give you a brief overview. Unfortunately, it's brief, but there will be time at the end for questions of immigration historically. And she's going to give a discussion of the Trump administration's actions to date today. She's going to look at briefly the 2 travel bans and other proposals, and finally how the impact and potential impact is on our immigrant community. Bernard will share his perspective as an elected Brookline official looking at this issue of sanctuary cities and immigration and what does that all mean for us. And when I say briefly, I think this is really hard to do in under 2 hours. Then we will turn to Laura Rochelo from the ACLU. She is their staff counsel and their community advocate of the ACLU of Massachusetts. There she focuses all on issues relating to immigrants. She's been at the ACLU for over a decade, and she works to help create policies that safeguard fundamental rights and to challenge in-court policies that do not do that. As a Latina and an immigrant from Argentina, she spends a lot of time advocating within the Latino immigrant communities in Massachusetts. So we are very thankful and fortunate. She will speak, and then she will sit back down. So I'm gonna do this fun swapping chair game with each of you. So we won't, we'll move this as speedy as possible. Then we will turn to Rusty Egmont, Professor Egmont. He will actually speak about a discussion related to refugees and their proposals to freeze entry for about 120 days and the limiting of entry to 50,000 people. He's a professor at the Boston College School of Social Work, where he teaches policy and builds connections between both the academic work that's done in diversity and the increasing cosmopolitan population of the foreign-born in our region. And he, it's important to note, is also the director of the BC Immigrant Integration Lab. And he will be able to speak from an academic perspective, and that will be, I'm very thankful for that. And then we're not done yet. We are very, very fortunate and very, very thankful and lucky that we have some real immigrant voices here who can really speak from their perspective and what's going on in their community. We'll have Juan with translation from our sister city board member, Lois Stettlander from El Salvador. And then we will also have Angela from Jamaica who will speak, who is also speaking from her perspective, as well as from Matahari, and she'll talk a bit about that as well. And then I'm hopeful that another immigrant voice, Candida, will also be speaking, who is from Trinidad. But you know, we're sort of playing improv here as my speaking list evolves over the next 2 hours. And that will be pretty fast and furious, and then we're really hoping to open up to a rich discussion at the end. It is our hope that we'll conclude by 5 o'clock, because we kind of have to stack chairs in rows of 4, or stacks of 4, and clean up. And the chairs must be similar in the rows of 4. And then we'll invite you downstairs to have a discussion over delicious and healthy looking clementines and beverages that are given by our volunteers, as you can have that discussion. And there are a number of information tables there with information from the ACLU and Mira and other places. And hopefully we can continue that conversation, because this is hopefully not the end, but just the beginning as we begin our education forum. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm gonna turn now to Ava Malona. Thank you so much. And let's welcome her heartily. It's a Sunday afternoon.
Thank you so very much for that kind and generous introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here. I want to start by thanking the organizer, and I won't mention all the names, you heard them, but Richard, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And also, very pleased to be part of this wonderful panel, and thank each and every one of you for your presence today. That speaks volumes of who you are, what this center is, and what Brookline. So just give it to all of you for being here. Thank you so very much. As you heard, I represent the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. We're the largest entity in New England promoting and enhancing immigrant and refugee integration. We have been around for 30 years since the passage of the Immigration Control and Reform Act under Reagan administration, and have been in the forefront for promoting and enhancing inclusion for immigrants and refugees. And I wanted to start by saying that for centuries, an idea had inspired people around the world to come to the United States. The idea that here in this wonderful and blessed land, people can find a better life, a safer life, and a freer life. Of course, it's important to remember that not all people come by choice. Some were brought here forcibly, and others were displaced of their lands. But for 200 years, families have crossed oceans, mountains and deserts to come to this country. Since 1820, 82 million foreign-born have settled in the United States as green card holders, or as we say, lawful permanent residents. And I want to remind all of us that immigrants built our railroads, our computers, educated and cared for our children, advanced our scientific knowledge, and enriched our culture. Immigrants are all of us, and we as Americans, we are as we are because of this continuous presence of immigrants and refugees and families and the communities that we represent. But the history of immigrants in the United States has been one of swings between restriction and inclusion, nativism and openness. We have seen the passage of the Chinese Inclusion Act, which barred entry to the United States of Chinese immigrants starting in 1882 and was expanded in 1917 to prohibit almost most Asians to come to the United States. These restrictions were in place until mid-60s. Nativist or anti-immigrant feelings drove what you remember as the Johnson Act of 1924, which created the infamous quota system. The quota system was a reaction of a high level of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe because many of these new Americans were Catholic or Jewish or Orthodox Christians, and America was perceived as becoming less white and less Protestant. So the quota system was put in place strictly to limit immigration from countries outside of Northern and Western Europe. And it worked. We saw significantly at those times, in 30s, 40s, and 50s, the new immigrants arriving, the numbers were dropped significantly. The proportion of the US population that had been born outside of this country also fell, as those who had come to the United States earlier in the century passed away. Around the same time, nativist influences led to the government carry out what is remembered to be Operation Wetback. And that was a program that the government conducted that deported many Mexican Americans at the time, and some of them even born in this country. Things changed. In 1965, the Civil Rights Movement and the pressure to expand our economy led to the Hart-Celler Act. And that was the end of the quota system. What we saw is a wave of immigration from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. We moved towards an immigration system that prioritized family reunification, a reflection of American values and community. Since 1975, the United States settled 3 million refugees, providing a remarkable model of integration for the world. We became a more diverse and global society, a country of strong economic sector, and immigrant communities were and are vital components of our fabric of our society. Consider, for example, what the United States or the world would be without Google, without YouTube, or without remote controls, or hairdryer, or Hollywood, or hot dogs. All of them were developed by immigrants and children of immigrants. Over 40% of Fortune 500 companies nationally were founded by immigrants and their children. That number is higher in our great Commonwealth. 60% of those companies are built and created by immigrants. And they generate almost $1.5 billion in revenue every year and provide jobs for nearly 500,000 people around the world. Here are some more numbers. Today, there are about 43 million across the nation, 14% of our workforce. 1 in 6 in the Bay States residents are immigrants and refugees. Today, they have $27 billion in spending power each year and contribute $4.5 billion in Social Security each year and in Medicare. And I'm very proud to say that here in our state, we have been smart and we always have been a welcoming Commonwealth. And we have seen immigrant integration being important to the betterment of all of us. And also remember that it has been a nonpartisan issue, and it should be, because immigrants, as you know, as the numbers or as the facts speak, are part of our fabric and makes us stronger. I'd like to take you back under Solucci's administration. At the time that the Clinton administration passed really restrictive laws at the federal level, IRA, the Illegal Immigration Control and Immigrant Responsibility Act, the welfare reform. Here in Massachusetts, the state stepped in and created $40 million programs for integration of new Americans. Linguistically, providing resources for people to learn English, employment and service trainings, also citizenship services, and we really made an example for our nation. And immigration and integration of foreign-born, it's something that we take very seriously. Under Romney's administration, there were different programs that were established, such as the citizenship program, a program that encouraged people to come forward and become citizens, a program that disappeared before that administration. Under Governor Patrick, there was a bigger vision for Massachusetts, and Massachusetts came up with a plan to better integrate immigrants and refugees into the fabric of our society, civically, linguistically, socially, and economically. That model provided a model for President Obama to come up with an executive order for a national integration policy for our country for the first time, which was a huge, huge achievement. And so the immigrant integration as a two-way street have been understood and protected and defended in our state, but also in the last 8 years, we made significant progress under the Obama administration to really come out with a strategy that would help states to better integrate immigrants and refugees and come up with specific plans for their economic, linguistic, and civic integration. But now we are at a turning point. Our national commitment to openness and inclusion of those who seek to come to this country for a better life or a safer life, or who come to, for the betterment of their children, all those things are at stake. We are facing a new nativist phase, restrictionist policy that would restrict new immigration, separate families, damage our economy, and violate our values. We have seen that the vision of the new administration is to deport Latinos and their families, who are a dynamic part of our economic and society. And it recalls back the Operation Wetback. The president's executive order banning immigrants and refugees, primarily from Muslim countries, it's a chilling echo of the Chinese Exclusion Act. The refugee ban is especially cruel and counterproductive measure that make the United States less safe. But that's not only what's at risk right now. The current administration's proposal overall, the immigration system that might become a quota system, maybe under another name, once again giving special preference to European immigrants that might encourage to come. And to illustrate what I just pointed out, I put together some what I'm calling lowlights, but of the memos of the DHS that are based on the executive order that were issued by President Trump in January and in February. That I'm not going to go over the many details, but just giving you some highlights as to what those entail. In terms of the big money issues, the executive orders call for mandatory detention for all immigrants, including families, including unaccompanied minors, and those who seek asylum. The executive order also approved the hiring of 5,000 new Border Patrol agents 10,000 new ICE agents. You are familiar with ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement, and also building a wall. In terms of the new enforcement priorities, under the Obama administration, there were priorities in place in terms of deportation. We know that more people were deported under the Obama administration as compared to previous administration, but the priorities were such that only those with criminal convictions were a priority. Under the current executive orders, individuals who are charged of a criminal offense of any kind, but not convicted, are still subject to deportation. Those who committed acts that constitute criminal offenses, those who may engage in fraud or willful misrepresentation. And another really problematic provision of this executive order is also the elimination of prosecutorial discretion. So under the prosecutorial discretion, there was enough discretion to decide who's a priority, who's a family with children, and so forth, but now that has been eliminated. So there are no more priorities. All those here unauthorized to stay, or those who violated their visa, those who are pending a chance to legalize their status are subject to deportation. The executive order also expands the partnership with local and law enforcement and calls for close collaboration between local and state police and the federal government. Massachusetts and over 360 jurisdictions across the country have chosen to focus really their resources for the safety of their state and for the safety of their residents. The executive order calls for collaboration and encourages to make local police and state police basically agents of the federal government and make them focus on a federal agenda to deporting families. Also, it brings back the Secure Communities program, a program that had so many flaws in the past, and the government under the Obama administration it was implemented, and then it was eliminated because the focus was to go after criminals, but the numbers and the facts show that half of those being deported were people with no criminal convictions, and the only crime they committed was working without proper papers. So that secure communities, infamous secure communities, is coming back. In terms of due process highlights, the order dramatically expand the use of expedited removal to cover all those individuals who have been in the U.S. for less than 2 years. So for what that means is people won't have a chance to go before an immigration court to make a case for their asylum, but they can be deported under this order. Also increase the bar for those fleeing persecution to pass what's called a credible fear interview at the time that they entered the U.S. Also, it expands to unaccompanied minors and restrict the definition of who unaccompanied minors are to exclude those minors to enter the United States and seek relief. In addition, those excluded would be detained, even though they are children, and subject to removal. Also, it provides and criminally prosecutes any parents who help their children to escape and come to the United States. So you can see what the vision is. In addition, the March 6th refugee executive order, I know Westy will speak more to that, but I just wanted to mention that that order also provides 120 days hold to all refugee arrivals while the administration is reviewing and vetting the procedures. And I know most of you know that we have a very rigorous system, a system that really has 12 to 15 steps that people are going through many, many security measures before they enter the United States. So the delay make us less safe, but that's what it does. And also 90 days hold to all admission from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. So in addition, also it provides for an indefinite hold to all refugees arriving from Syria and reduces the admissions for fiscal year 2007 from 110,000 to 50,000. Additionally, allows states and local jurisdictions to have a say in the refugee settlement. Requires the completion of biometric entry-exit system and to all ports of entry. I have only 5 minutes left, so I'll be very quick. So currently blocked by the temporary restraining order issued by the Federal District Court of Hawaii. So that's also the U.S. District Court of Maryland has also ruled against this executive order. And in case it's pending before the Western District Court of Washington, which we are proud to say that our remarkable Attorney General has joined that case as well. So this is pretty much in very low light what those executive orders provide and give a vision as to where this administration is in terms of immigration policy and immigrant integration. What we expect in terms of possible future actions, the DACA program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, which had given temporary status of undocumented students under the Obama administration, is unknown. The president has gone back and forth to say that we'll do something, but there is nothing legislatively that can be done, so they're kind of in the limbo to see what's going to happen. We also are hearing that it might come, other major changes, what's called public charge, for people who are coming to join their families here, and making it more difficult for them if they, use healthcare or if you use WIC and other necessity programs at the time of entry. And also eliminates other protections such as sensitive location memo for people who may be in a very difficult situation. So those are things that we might expect coming from this administration. So what is the picture in our state and what can we do? As I said, regardless of what always has happened at the federal level, given that immigration it's a federal issue, Massachusetts always has been in the lead in terms of healthcare, in terms of immigrant integration, in terms of a Commonwealth who believe that immigrants are a solution and not a problem. And we have seen this, under many administrations. And the point, and one of the things that Mira has done, working to just make sure that immigrant integration is it's a nonpartisan issue or a bipartisan issue. Our governor has spoken against the executive order. He wrote a 6-page letter to Secretary Kelly of the Department of Homeland Security, making the case that it's really damaging to Massachusetts and to our country if this executive order, as they are implemented, are prohibiting people from entering, and especially given Massachusetts' place and our role in science and technology, which was really a very significant step for a Republican governor, to call attention to this issue. So I just wanted to make aware that that's happening, and also there is a welcoming entry from the governor to all Massachusetts refugees coming in, which is different than what the previous statement was. So I think we are continuing to be an example. And then one last thing that I think is extremely important for all of you to be involved and to understand. I mentioned when I talked about the executive orders and what they provide, and specifically as it relates to the safety of our Commonwealth and the use of resources for the safety of all of us and not just for a federal deportation agenda. There is a Massachusetts bill called Support Safe Communities. It's a bill that has been introduced in both chambers, that it's a priority for our coalition and 150 of our institutions who are members of MIRA across the Commonwealth. And the Senate number is 1305, and the House version is 3269. And what the Safe Communities does is protect the civil rights of all state residents by making sure that all tax dollars are not used to help deport families, or to create a Muslim registry, but those are used for the safety and the betterment of our Commonwealth. The key features of the Safe Community, and I'll be, I have less than 1 minute, so I'll be done in 30 seconds, is number one, it prohibits state support for a Muslim registry because, we We may see those bills coming up as outside section of the budget, as our budget in Massachusetts is taking place, and we have seen this in the last 6 years. The anti-immigrant hysteria has been part of that outside section, so keep an eye on that. The second piece that this Safe Community Act provides is ensure basic due rights for immigrants, so at least they have the right to make their case before the courts, or have attorneys to represent them, ensures that the police resources are used in Massachusetts for Massachusetts safety and are not going outside of that. Many of you have heard that the sheriff of Bristol County wanted to send inmates to Mexico to build a wall. So this legislation prohibits that from happening. Massachusetts has no business to send anyone to build the wall. Also, it prohibits collaboration between the Homeland Security and the enforcement agencies to hold such agreements. And it upholds our standards of our Constitution, and it's in compliance with the federal law. So it's a very comprehensive bill. It is, as I said, provides safety and civil rights and due process rights for all of us. And I encourage you to really get involved and push this piece of legislation, because we are Massachusetts and we always have been a leader in the country. And I want to leave you with one last thought, a question to, so you can ask yourself, is are you going to stay silent or are you going to act? And also, how will our children and the children of our children remember this moment? Will it be seen as a new era of the nativist restrictions, like the Johnson Act quota system, which lasted for decades? Or will we be able to recommit to our values as who we are and remain such, active, and also making sure that immigrants will continue to be seen as a solution and not as a problem? Thank you so much.
And it was very hard to do. I take no enjoyment in my timing signs, though I thought they were fun to make. And I wanted to acknowledge that Senator Cindy Cream is also here from our legislature. She is here. Thank you very much. And Ava says give her a big round of applause. That was Eva's big action item, so you can talk to her afterwards during refreshments. I'm going to turn it over now to Bernard Green for a very brief overview of his viewpoint as an elected official here in Brookline. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get introduced, I'm Bernard Green, Board of Selectmen. I'd like to thank the organizers of this very important event and the Senior Center for hosting it. It's really critical that we have these discussions and we think through how to address, the what do you call it, doo-doo sandwiches coming down on us from the U.S. administration. My role in this panel is primarily to discuss the actions taken by the Board of Selectmen in response to the threats that we're facing from the administration. I'm going to use the statement of the Selectmen of February 7th as my focus. As you may recall, that statement set out 4 tasks for town government and the community in connection with the threats faced by both immigrants, irrespective of whether they're documented, as well as refugees. Those tasks related to police procedures, town services, legal action, and fourth, what is really relevant to everyone here, community action. Now, when I talk about addressing these immigrant issues, I very seldom, if ever, use the term sanctuary city. I think that, and this is just my opinion, that can be a distraction. It just plays into the little hands of who. And it really takes us all a focus on the real substance of what we have to do to protect immigrants and protect refugees. Not country, as Eva Malona discussed in some depth in her remarks. So I'd like to sort of start off my talk by saying that the fundamental question is, why do we care? And we really have to answer that question, because if we don't understand our interest in these efforts, then number one, we're not going to be able to articulate our views outside the Brookline bubble. And number two, we run the risk of having doubt and backsliding when things begin to get really, really bad in this country, as they will. Because we know that the administration, has a number of things up its sleeve that, not to be hysterical about it, but are really kind of scary. I think, for me, the answer to that question, why do we care, is that immigrants play an incredibly important role in this country, both culturally, business-wise, in every single cuisine, in every single way. And we need to understand that, because if we don't really focus on the ways in which immigrants and refugees play an important role in our country, we are susceptible to attributing some of the, even if it's subconsciously, some of the terrorist acts that may occur in this country, as the administration wants us to do, to our Muslim brothers and sisters, even though, as one set of immigrants, even though the real threat we face in this country, which has been an ongoing threat of terrorism for decades and centuries, is right-wing racist terrorism. And and Trump would like to, matter of fact, he's doing things to de-emphasize focus on domestic terrorism. And he'd like us to think that is our Muslim brothers and sisters who are a real threat, and that we should fear, instead of the domestic terrorists that we have. For example, the incident in New York a few days ago, where a 66-year-old man, James Harris Jackson, was killed by a racist terrorist who came up from Baltimore for the specific purpose of killing as many black men as possible. That domestic white Christian terrorism got little attention in our media, but the attack on Westminster Bridge in London, in front of the House of Parliament, was all over the news. Now, the London attack was something dastardly, and that should have gotten a lot of coverage. But why wasn't this attack in New York City, in our country, similarly in the press? As Eva Malona mentioned, the other thing about immigrants and refugees is the incredible value they bring to our country. And I'd like to talk about just some examples. For example, the Haitian and other immigrant students in the Boston public school system, who every year dominate the valedictorian list that the Globe publishes in the spring. I mean, think about that. And here, 5 minutes. Right. And here in Brookline, a immigrant family, the Guerreros, play an incredible, important role, and have for many years. And the eldest daughter, Leslie Guerrero, was one of the Brookline honorees by the Harvey Farberman a few years ago, and is now a aspiring lawyer. I know I have a little bit of time, but let me quote something from the Dean of the Fletcher School at Tufts that I think really brings things together. It takes enormous courage and endurance to take your 4-year-old son's hand, put your 2-year-old daughter on your back, smile encouragingly at your wife, and walk 1,000 kilometers across Syria to a refugee center in Turkey. I want that person on my team. And that's how we should think about immigrants. We want them on our team because they will help our team win, to prosper and to better our lives for all of us. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to focus on the selectmen's statement that we released on February 7th. It sets out tasks in 4 areas for town government and the community. In terms of the first area, police procedures, and I'll focus on that, and then just mention the legal action task as well as the town services task, which are also part of our statement with respect to town government actions. But in terms of the police procedures, we asked the Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations Commission to look at police procedures in terms of their impact or effect on immigration issues. The commission set up a working group to come up with some proposals to the Board of Selectmen, and on March 7th, we looked at those proposals. We passed some of them with respect to rescinding a special order of the police department that allowed certain cooperation with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, and we voted to explicitly prohibit such cooperation. And finally, we voted to prohibit any effort on the part of the town to enter into agreements with the Attorney General or other federal agencies that would allow us, like some counties here in Massachusetts, here in blue Massachusetts are doing, allowing them to be trained by and then go out and do federal enforcement of immigration issues. We prohibit that explicitly, although I doubt if anyone would suggest that we do that anyway. Going forward, the Commission will also review a number of other issues with respect to police procedures. I think the most important ones are the effort by a part of Immigration and Naturalization Service called U.S. Customs and Border Protection to rent out some towns and counties jail space. Traffic enforcement issues, which came up in our hearing at the Board of Selectmen. Immigration raids, I don't know if we have immigration raids around here, but we sure should be expecting them in the future, and how our police need to respond to those immigration raids to ensure that, number one, they are authorized, and that the people doing them, in fact, are authorized to do it. And secondly, to ensure that public safety is protected while the federal government is rummaging around our community looking for people to deport. 1 minute. Let me just wrap up by saying that our statement has a 4th prong, and that is what the community can do. And that's really what I want to talk about, and it's very, very important. There are a lot of things that are being done here in Brookline as well as elsewhere. We should think about ways in which these things can be expanded, or new ideas can be implemented by your churches, your civic groups, your political groups, and other organizations. The Girl Scout troop here in Brookline, never lived in Brooklyn, thought about how can they as Girl Scouts help other girls their age who are refugees. And they identified a family who had been in a refugee camp in Jordan, and they adopted them basically, provided support as they came to the U.S. I think they were able to get in, but they're organizing to provide assistance to those girls their age. People are mobilizing, I think here in Brookline, people are talking about organizing to mobilize to show up at immigration raids, bear witness and monitor the actions, and then spread the information over social media. In Philadelphia, where I'm from, it's called the New Sanctuary Movement. Also, people are mobilizing at immigration hearings. For example, tomorrow at 11:30 at the JFK building, federal building, there's a mobilization of people to bear witness to a hearing affecting 3 farm laborers from Central America who work in dairy farms in Vermont, for doing work that is difficult, is dirty, is hard, is dangerous, that Americans won't do, and that provide milk on your table in the morning. So people are mobilized to help them by showing up at the hearing at the federal building. One other thing we can do is visit our local mosques. I mean, Muslims are being targeted by this administration and all the filth and rabble that they have whipped up both during the campaign as well as after and before against Muslims. On April 2nd, the various mosques around this area have organized an open house opportunity for us to visit mosques and learn about them and provide support to them. I urge that people look into that and consider doing that. Okay, let me just conclude. We're facing a very dangerous time in this country. We are seeing how easy it is for an advanced, developed, educated society to begin a slide into barbarism. In much the same way that happened in the former Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, in Cambodia, and of course in the 1930s in Germany. In each case, when you look through history, each case, those countries were fairly open, inclusive, diverse, and suddenly it slipped into barbarity. We should not get hysterical about what's going on in America. We should just bear in mind that we're dealing with very, very serious issues, very, very serious threats. And our response, therefore, has to be serious, thoughtful, and effective. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Laura from the ACLU of Massachusetts. And thank you so much again, Bernard, for your time.
And don't feel bad about making me stop, because there are really great people on here today, including the audience. Louder. Let me just get this mic a little bit. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Laura. It's a little bit. I'm short from the podium, so I'm just gonna walk here. Hi everybody. I'm Laura with the ACLU. Can you hear me now? Okay. Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me to the standing room only event, which is just fantastic that you've all turned out on a rainy Sunday. And I think that's the good news, right? That's the good news, that you are all here, that meetings like this are happening around the Commonwealth, around the country, that people are getting active in ways that they have never been before, and that people who have been active are getting even more energized by just the amount of people and the amount of goodwill. So I think that's the good news, and that's kind of the theme of what I want to talk to you today about, which is sanctuary cities. Remember I said, this is a loaded term. This is sometimes a distraction. I'm of the opinion that we should take the term back, but if nobody needs to use it if they don't want to. So sanctuary cities can also be called freedom cities, can also be called welcoming cities, can be called trust acts, which is what we were doing before the Trump administration. I'm trying to take the term back, but free speech, everyone gets to choose the term that is right for their community, that is right for the politics of their community, as long as the policies are basically the same. So let's just start with what is a sanctuary city, a trust city, a freedom city, a welcoming city. There is no one particular legal definition. There is no one standard that describes everybody. Generally, it means there is less collaboration with immigration and customs enforcement. And this has become really important now because we've heard the Trump administration say that one of the ways they're going to deport more people is to force, coerce, welcome, and empower local agencies to collaborate more, right? They use that term, we're going to empower our local police to collaborate with ICE. We know that this means coercion. And what that means is anytime a person is arrested in your city, in your town, what happens is that they usually get brought in, they get booked, and their fingerprints go to the federal government. That's been the case for decades. Now those fingerprints go to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's something that's been around for about 10 years. a little bit more maybe, and they go to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, right? So anybody, if you get arrested, you are a US born citizen, your fingerprints go to ICE. They run them through their database, and if they think that you're a person they want to deport, and they make a lot of mistakes. They sometimes find US citizens with names that sound like people that they want to deport. They will put what's called an ICE detainer on you, and they will send that to the local agency where you've been arrested. Now that local agency now faces a choice. What do we do with this person once they're released? The person posts bail, the person gets released by a bail person on their own recognizance, but we've got this thing called an ICE detainer, and they're asking us to hold that person until ICE can come and get them. What do we do? And that's what it is. It's a choice. It's a request. They can't force local agencies to hold them, but they're trying to coerce and force police to do that. And so sanctuary cities, the number one thing they do is they say, we won't hold people on ICE detainers. And then most of them go a little further. They say, we're not going to let you know when this person is being released. We're not going to let you know where they live. We're not going to let you know a lot of stuff that you want to know about them because they're a member of our community and they've been arrested, but the judicial system will sort that out, and we don't want to have anything to do with immigration enforcement in our town because that is good for us. And so, the policies also say we don't ask about immigration enforcement, immigration status. We won't ask, things that we don't need to know. We will treat everyone equally regardless of immigration status in our town or city or county. And so that's what basically a welcoming or sanctuary city does. And why is this important? I'll read to you a little bit from a letter that 61 law enforcement officials, including Commissioner Evans of Boston, Chelsea Chief Brian Keyes, and Middlesex Sheriff Peter Katusian signed. It's a letter to Congress that they signed about 2 weeks ago. And they say, we believe that making our communities safer means better defining roles and improving relationships between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities. Local control has been a beneficial approach to law enforcement for decades. Having the federal government compel state and local law enforcement to carry out new and sometimes problematic tasks undermines the delicate federal balance and will harm locally based, community-oriented policing. Now, what does that mean? If you believe that any time you come into contact with your local police, you could be on a pipeline to deportation, guess what? You won't call for help. You won't collaborate. You won't report crimes, right? And that's bad for everyone. And so even before Trump, about 400 cities had already passed protective policies. 2 states had done this through their legislature, California and Connecticut. 2 others through their governors, Rhode Island and Illinois. This is nothing new, and retaliation against these cities and towns and counties is also nothing new. There was a bill in Congress under Obama to defund sanctuary cities, which didn't pass. The Department of Justice started requiring more of cities when they was giving out grants. So it's not new, but what we're seeing is an increased level of pressure and coercion by ICE agents from the top to the very bottom. Now, on January 25th, Donald Trump signed an executive order entitled Enhancing Public Safety in the Interior of the United States. Now, Ava went through a lot of those provisions. Another provision talks about taking funding away from sanctuary cities. It says that sanctuary jurisdictions across the U.S. willfully violate federal law. These jurisdictions have caused immeasurable harm to the American people and the very fabric of our republic. And it threatens to take away all federal funding from cities that don't collaborate. It doesn't define those cities. It says the Attorney General shall have the discretion to decide who is a sanctuary city and who isn't. It does focus on this one federal law about communication, but it really leaves it open-ended. And so we see that now, there's fear, like, do I pass a sanctuary city policy or not? And then the budget came down last week or a week ago. You may have heard that part of the budget defunds sanctuary cities. Well, that's not true. What the budget does is it defunds a program called SCAP, State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. And that's a budget item. It's a program that's available to any city. As it turns out, California was receiving a ton of this money, but that's because of California's population. What the money is for is to reimburse jails that hold immigrants. Whenever somebody is arrested or detained or serves a sentence and is a non-US citizen and fits certain categories of the grant, you could get some federal funding back for that. Now, any city can apply for that. Anybody who holds, mostly jails, who hold non-citizens can apply for that. It just so happened that, obviously because California has a huge jail population, they were getting a lot of money, and they are a sanctuary state. But there were a lot of cities that were complying, collaborating voluntarily, and they felt kind of, betrayed by the federal government, because, at least by Trump, because his budget proposal would strip their funding. And now, another part of the executive order said that they would publish a list. Now, this is sort of like an attempt at public shaming. But it says, to better inform the public regarding the public safety threats associated with sanctuary jurisdictions, the Secretary of Homeland Security shall utilize something called a declined detainer outcome report, so that these are detainers, ICE detainers that cities have declined to fulfill, and on a weekly basis, make public a comprehensive list of criminal actions committed by aliens in any jurisdiction that ignored or otherwise failed to honor any detainers with respect to such aliens. Now, last week, the government published its first list. I'll give it to them, they're doers, right? They're just going down the list and knocking them out. They published a list of 118 jurisdictions that have enacted policies limiting cooperation with ICE, and a list of declined detainers and crimes that the person was engaged in when they were arrested. Now, the list is incomplete. Like I said, they had 118 jurisdictions. We know of at least 400 or 500. They themselves say that the data is inaccurate or old. Brookline is not. There are no Massachusetts cities on that list. Brookline was not on the list of sanctuary cities, and it was not on the list of declined detainers. Some Massachusetts cities were on the list of sort of sanctuary jurisdictions, like Boston, Chelsea, Somerville, Cambridge. And these have been traditionally, they've had their policies for a very long time. And if you go down the list of crimes, most of them are minor crimes, a lot of DUIs, possession, drug possession, and nonviolent stuff. But there has been a reaction to this retaliation. Like I said, 61 law enforcement officers filed this letter. There was a letter by a group of congressmen and congresswomen, also to Congress, asking the president to rescind this part of the executive order. Jim McGovern signed up, but nobody else from the Massachusetts delegation, which is odd. And the threat to the reaction to the threat of retaliation has been very strong. So these law enforcement officials say, we believe that state and local law enforcement must work together. The issue of so-called sanctuary jurisdictions is a complex one. We are concerned that many jurisdictions that cooperate with federal immigration authorities are actually in compliance with the law, and that they're going to lose their funding. And then there was a lawsuit before the budget, but after the sort of threats of retaliation. There was a lawsuit brought by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under the law on behalf of two Massachusetts cities, Chelsea and Lawrence, who have declared themselves Chelsea a sanctuary city and Lawrence a trust act city, which actually the ACLU and others worked together with Lawrence to pass that a year and a half ago. And what they say is that the cities are going to lose their funding, right? So Chelsea could lose $13.9 million in federal grants. Lawrence could lose $37.8 million. That represents 10 and 15% of their budget, respectively. And they argue that it's an unfair policy, that they had no notice, that it violates the Constitution, the constitutional prohibitions on commandeering of local resources. That's under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. It violates their rights. It violates the separation of powers. And it goes into sort of the legality of this executive order. And so that was filed a few weeks ago, and the government still has some time to respond. What will probably happen is that the government will file a motion to dismiss, I would guess, based on the fact that it's not right. Because, of course, they haven't lost their funding yet, but they're saying that they probably will under this executive order. Now, Brookline, you heard what's happening. There's a table downstairs with more information, and I think, I would encourage you all to get involved with the Brookline process. I know that there's a meeting tomorrow, right? Is that right? Of the working group. Yeah, it's at 6 to 7 p.m. No, 6 to 7:30 p.m. in Brookline Town Hall, room 308. And I think there's a table downstairs with more information. We have a toolkit at the ACLU of Massachusetts website. I put up the little downstairs, there's a table with ACLU information. So if you are not from Brookline and would like to do this in your own city, or if you are in Brookline and want more resources, we have a ton of information, research into why sanctuary cities are actually good for the economy and good for safety. Letters, congressional letters, letters from law enforcement officials, a model policy. All that is at aclum.org/sanctuary. Again, aclum.org/sanctuary. And we encourage you to look up those resources. And then once again, I'm going to highlight what you can also do. Tomorrow, Monday at 11:30 at the JFK building, there will be a rally that's going to be organized by many organizations to support these two immigrant workers and immigrant advocates who were picked up by ICE specifically because of their activism. They were targeted because of who they are and what they do. They were targeted right outside of the Immigrant Justice Center. And it's a travesty, and we all, I think, we need to stand behind them and say, we will not allow this to happen. So again, join the ACLU, join Mira, join all of us doing all this work. And I applaud you for what you're already doing, and please feel free to reach out to us to help you along the way.
Wow, she didn't even use all of her time. I'm so thankful she brought me back on time. So now we will turn to Professor Westy Egmont of the Boston College School System.
Okay, we'll try to make this a little more interactive for you for 1 minute. I was thinking about the power of words, which often to me are undervalued, but we've been listening to a barrage of words coming out of the West Wing. So I want to give you concepts that have come from the West Wing in the last 60 days. If you think they come out like mortar shells, risking life and limb of those of us who would protect liberty, then you can respond by going, boom. Okay? Well, here's a few. Last 60 days. We will ban Muslims from 6 countries. Boom. We will halt the U.S. refugee program. Boom. We will instruct our embassies to make visa applications much harder and do extreme vetting. Boom. Or 2 booms. We will emphasize deportation. Boom. We will enlarge the border patrol. Boom. We will extend the border patrol 100 miles from the border, which includes 200 million Americans under the control of the border. Boom, boom. We will expand the jurisdiction of Customs and Border Patrol and DHS, now the largest federal agency. We will build a big, beautiful wall that every American taxpayer will pay for. We will cut down the number of refugees from 110,000 to 50,000. We will close the door of hope to anyone from Syria. We will support other nationalists like Le Pen in France and Putin in Russia. We will use the term radical Islamic fundamentalists every time we want to bring fear about the vigilante forces or arouse the suspicion and anger of our fellow patriots. We will enlarge mandatory detention. We will work together to expand the privatization of detention centers, where 90% of them are privately owned and where the federal government pays daily. We will create a victim of immigrant crime office and feature them in national television next to the First Lady while making sure that we will talk about immigrant crime, and we will ignore all the white boys who killed people in Colorado and in Florida and in Massachusetts and in every other state in the Union. We will prioritize the deportation, and I quote the executive order of who we will prioritize: convicted criminals, immigrants who had been arrested for any criminal offense, those who committed fraud, and anyone who may have committed a crime. Everybody. We will not expand the number of judges in the immigration courts because we want to keep people in detention centers. There's profit to be made. We will teach fear, not and be deaf to the voices that affirm diversity and religious pluralism. We will fund the escalators out of poverty like food programs while we put more money into things like walls. We will punish the cities and states that express a commitment to justice for all residents if they use words like trust or freedom or sanctuary. Oh, it goes on. This is not my president. I try to teach in a serious way from a nonpartisan position what it means to be responsible Americans. It is amazing to me that the Republican Party was the pro-immigrant party. Wall Street Journal and the Republican Party up to about 20 years ago. The flip-flop is a phenomenal change in America. We as a nation have a heritage that we cannot let be destroyed. Now, this comes down first, we happen to be in a white bubble tonight, this afternoon. If we look at the room, Bernard, side. One of the things,
You other people too.
a few others, but one of the phenomena is you're in a city of 81.5% white. This is no longer America. As you know, in just a few years, less than 2 decades, we will be a minority-majority country. All right? We are changing. The demographics of the country are changing dramatically. Beautiful Brookline is up to over 12% Asians, but only 3.5% Hispanics, making it not even a profile of Massachusetts. It's an unusual thing because we are dominated in this part of Massachusetts with a lot of folks from Eastern Europe, and we have a little different skin tone because of ethnic groups. What are the ethnic groups in Brookline? They are predominantly, our ethnic community, our foreign community is from China, from India, from Russia, and from the United Arab Emirates in that order. Interesting, huh? Well, we are all living in immigrant communities. We're all living in an immigrant nation. And Massachusetts is not immune to any of this. We have 1 out of 6 of us is foreign born in Massachusetts. The city of Boston, over 20% are foreign born, but over 48% of all the children have another language being spoken at the dinner table. Children of our public school system in Boston go home to another language. This is a city that thrives on its diversity. In fact, the greater Boston area is rich in its diversity, so rich that I say it's the most cosmopolitan diversity in the United States. We have no one ethnic group that dominates like would be true in El Paso or in San Diego. We are from everywhere in the world. I have a little project up at the top of the Peru, a little museum called Dreams of Freedom that I created, which tells the immigration story of Boston. And if you go up there, you'll see one wall, David Malona's pictures on it, representing her old stomping grounds in the Balkans. But one of the things that is interesting to me is we have 198 countries are recognized by the United Nations. We have found 190 nationalities living in Boston. Isn't that phenomenal? Here's a scary one for you. So there's just a little gray hair in the crowd. 67% of every healthcare worker in Massachusetts is foreign born. 67%. Somebody wants to close the doors. Officially, the White House position is to cut immigration in half, to stop all refugees for 120 days, to stop all Syrian refugees for an undetermined amount of time, and to cease to maintain the robust refugee program that has fed the United States some of its greatest diversity. I think it's a deplorable way to look into the future and to rob America of the richness not only of what we've had, but what we depend on today. When we take a look at this issue of the refugee program, I point out a couple of things. One is we have averaged in Massachusetts since President Reagan formed the Refugee Act in 1980. We have had in the United States 3 million refugees resettled. Now, we only know a handful of people who've even been found guilty of a felony out of that 3 million. There is no crime incident. There's not a terrorist among the 3 million. There are, by the way, 35 felons who serve in the U.S. Congress. You got that point. You want to clean out the crime in America, we know where to start. The U.S. refugee program has been a remarkable success story, and the 2,500 refugees on average that we've brought into the United States each of the last 30 years has been an enrichment of our state. You know the stories of the lost boys. But if you haven't read today's Boston Globe, you know, there's a story that'll bring a tear to your eye. I mean, Mark Jacobs, the Jewish Children and Family Services, done a fabulous job of bringing one of those few series that made it through in the last hours before what was going to be a ban. And we see a really wonderful story that's there of what it's like to be a Syrian coming into Massachusetts and watching how one synagogue did everything that was necessary for the well-being of this one Syrian family. It's a touching, beautiful story. We can do it, and we do it well. So we want to keep doing it. We want to keep doing it. There is no reason to cut off that flow of 2,500 to us, nor is there any reason for fear about the success of this population. And people say, oh, they're coming from you know, countries that are in chaos. Well, let me tell you, we have over 22,000 Vietnamese who came out of chaos. Many of whom might have worked on either side and come through the trenches. Not a problem, but a thriving Vietnamese community in Boston. Fields Corner is the heart of that community, but not a problem. My family's adopted one of the lost boys of the Sudan. What a great group of guys, Dinka guys who come up. They were neither lost nor boys, but they have been men of enormous courage and faith and determination. They are deeply devout men of almost all Episcopalians, interestingly. They have come as a group into the United States, and they have found their way. And one of them said to me in the elevator, I said, Paul, what are you going to do with your life? He said, Dr. West, he said, I want so much to go back. He said, there are only 45 of us in the original group. He said, one of us should be the president of South Sudan. When we open the doors, what do? Right? We provide remittances. We provide educated leadership. It was the refugees that were outside of Uganda, in Uganda mostly, that organized the new government that went back into Rwanda. The tremendous poverty and bloodshed that goes on in Central America is heartbreaking. The homicide capital of the world is Honduras. But today, more money goes from U.S. refugees and immigrants who come into the United States in remittances to Central America than all the foreign aid of the world. Immigrants are sacrificial. Immigrants take care of their own. Immigrants send money home. Refugees enrich our community. They better our lives. They fill the voids in our employment force. And what we get in return is we get a better life for ourselves. Be selfish, folks. Keep the door open. Now, I want to say two things. One is, Laura is one of those terrific heroes. But if you want to think about this issue, we're not going to change most of the stuff unless we take it to lawsuits. The ACLU, with brilliant young women like her, are the front line lawyers who will defend us, defend the Constitution of the United States, will sue the President of the United States. I think ACLU deserves our applause. When the airports closed, who was there? ACLU organizing. Terrific job. Mira is about to celebrate its 30th anniversary in June 1st. It has been the voice for all of us in Massachusetts who are concerned about immigrants. It has been the singular voice, and Ava Malona alone was the youngest judge in her country before she came here, has dedicated herself. I watched her reading the work that Senator Kennedy did in his life that he was putting in along with McCain to try to correct and improve our immigration system. The legislators of Washington turn to her and trust her voice. The other day I heard Senator Warren thank her for being the best voice of anybody who calls their office with information of how to read it and how to respond. This is the kind of informed, intellectual leadership that can analyze the policy, speak effectively, mobilize legislatures in the state or the federal government. Mira and Ava doing fantastic work. And if you want to know about immigrant integration, you can sign up for my newsletter. In my professional life, what I try to do is encourage the fact that we have 43 million foreign-born in the United States. We cannot assume that we're going to maintain unity in this country as we get more diverse without effort. So things like Safe Community Act that Mira is proposing, the decision being made in Brookline about how to be a welcoming, safe, trustworthy city where immigrants feel protected is important. Unless we take initiatives along the way to find the rhetoric publicly, to do the symbolic acts, to be inclusive in the signage in our public buildings that say everyone is welcome here, we will fail to build the America that we need for the future. But if we do it now, if we're conscious at the front end and conscious in the middle of this wave, we're in the third largest wave of immigrants in our history. Not the largest, by the way. The Industrial Revolution was much larger. But in the third largest wave of our history, if we take seriously the challenge that's in front of us to be inclusive right now, we will change the America for our children. And I'll give you one way to do that. I'm embarrassed to say that I was busy shooting off my mouth, talking about this issue, teaching classes on the subject, and I realized that some houses had gotten built across from me, and I didn't know anybody in those buildings. So I went knocking at the door and said, hi, welcome to the neighborhood. And I discovered somebody who was an Egyptian doctor and a Cambodian dental hygienist. Right in 3 houses that were in sight of my front door. I thought, oh man, I'm all talk and no action. So one of the things I want to just challenge you to do is think about who lives on your street. You know them. Find somebody who's from a different country than your family, invite them to your house, have a cup of coffee together. A simple act, but I believe it will transform our future. Because when we open our doors, we open our lives, we make other people feel welcome and included, but we then create the communities that we want to live in, with people who, like us, believe that they're at home here, building a common community, a common life, and a common nation.
Thank you so much. Wow, and I can't even actually my slides yet. So now we're going to turn to our immigrant voices.
I'd like to thank Professor Rusty for inviting me. I had the pleasure of taking a couple classes with him at Boston College, and that's where I went on to get my certification in immigration and refugees. So to start a little, I am, I was born in the Cape Verdean Islands, small country, third world country in West Coast of Africa. A lot of people don't know it, and my response is Google it. So my journey started when I was 13 years old. I had a medical condition. I was told I was going to come to America with a student visa. Prior to that, my family were here. I had generations and generations of family who migrated here. My biological father actually was here, but I didn't get a pleasure to meet him until I came to America. So I was 13. My mom had me when she was 15 years old, and my dad came before I was born. So can you imagine a 15-year-old raising a child in a third world country? So yes, part of my job growing up was to carry water, no electricity. I lived also in a farm where we raised chicken. My daily activity was to chase the chicken to find where the eggs were. You can imagine. Then you find dozens of eggs and you're like happy, but then you spend half of your day chasing the damn chicken. So that was my childhood. But then, you know, departure from Cape Verde was sad because I came in a student visa and I was like, well, America? Didn't think of it until I was told I was to come here, and I had no choice but to, due to my medical condition. So when I came here, I envisioned this country to be so beautiful because I watched movies, like princess movies. Like I thought there was like oranges falling from the tree, and I landed in JFK, New York. I was like, I'm in America? And then they were like, yes, welcome. It was pouring. I was like, I want to go back. This is not what I dreamed of. You know, the typical American dream that every foreign has of this country. That didn't hit me that day. But I met my father for the first time at the airport, and he was a stranger to me because I only saw him in pictures and just phone calls. So that was just different too. So coming here, went to high school with no documents because my story was complicated. My dad didn't petition me to come here. I don't know for whatever reason it was, but it started a petition for me to stay here legally. So my petition got complicated because my dad petitioned me and the immigration were like, well, this is an unknown child that you never claimed, so we're not gonna accept the application. So I have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to get my green card. And for you to say you meet your biological father for the first time, and then for a system to tell you that you have to prove to them that you are really daughter and father, and it has to be done by blood. And there's a lot of confusion, a lot of concerns in the family. And that could break a family. It got to the point where I had a discussion with my father that if I wasn't the biological daughter, he would still adopt me. And so that is so sad, because it's heartbreaking. Because you're like, well, I'm meeting a stranger for the first time, but then I have to maybe he's a stranger after all, because he might not be my father. But when we provided the DNA test, I was 18 years old, I was in high school. My high school career was tough because I was afraid. I got scholarships to go abroad because I was such a good student. They offered me to go study abroad, and I couldn't take it. I had to come up with lies. My father wouldn't let me, but in reality, I was, illegal. I couldn't go anywhere. So I went through my high school career embarrassed. I was called, go back home, you don't speak English, all the bullying names that you can hear. I kept it. I was strong enough. And a couple months before I went to college, I received my green card. So I was able to go to a 4-year college, a private college, Wheaton College in Norton, Mass. And I was so happy. And even throughout my college career, also I had to be in fear and lies. Everyone, college in America, you go and you study abroad, you learn, and you explore. I didn't have that beauty. I didn't have that opportunity, unfortunately, to do that. So my senior year came, there was this great opportunity to go to Trinidad and Tobago. I was like, you know what, Candida, you are going to get the visa and you're gonna go. So I decided to go. And so going out of the country was so great. I had no problem with the group of students and professor. Coming back was a problem. I got stopped. I got all these sort of questions asked. How much weight you gained? I was like, what? Who brought you here? Why did you come here? So I got nervous. I started biting my lip, and the agent was like, stop biting your lip. Stop moving. I'm like, why? So as I peeked, I'm a very curious person. So I was like this, and the person is a girl. She was going through the most wanted list. So I was like, oh, so you're looking if I'm in that list, if I'm a criminal. Then she's like, okay, ma'am, you need to step aside. I was like, okay, what is going on? And every one of my classmates went through fine, my professor, and they were just waiting for me. And that, you could imagine, I'm like, oh God, I'm that person. And they were waiting for me, wondering what was going on. They grabbed my suitcase. It was in Texas, actually. So you can imagine dogs sniffing your suitcases. They brought dogs over. I'm like, okay, this dog is not gonna bite me. They ripped my suitcase apart. They really flipped it over. And when they were done, they were ma'am, you're set to go. I'm like, my suitcase is all flipped upside down. And I was so angry that I didn't cry. I was angry, and I made a promise that day. I was like, I'm never gonna travel outside the country until I get my citizenship. And I didn't. In 2013, I became a U.S. citizen. I know, from 13 years old until I was 22 years old, and I officially became a citizen. And that process was hard too, because the questions they asked you in the application, like, have you ever, excuse my language, prostituted yourself? It's like, what? Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you ever sold drugs? Have you ever stole money? All these questions that is inhumane, that makes you feel less of a person. And I was like, there's no need for a person to go through this to officially call themselves a U.S. citizen or a citizen, But it was a big deal for me and my family. It's like a goal, or a dream. Everyone has dreams to go off and become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer. Our dream is to become a citizen, to be honest with you. And that citizenship paper is framed, I'm sure. It's framed in my wall. In every house that you go to, my family's house, you see, the first thing you walk into the door in the living room, you see that their citizen is framed in on the wall. because it's a dream come true, because that opens up a lot for us. So it was a great pleasure of, and I think back of all these experiences, and they were painful, and they taught me a great lesson. So I went on and I knew that I wanted to help the immigrant population. I wanted to know because I was in their shoes. And it might be different stories for every immigrant and refugee that comes to this country, but I can understand sort of. So now I'm at Boston College attending my master, and the first thing I saw there that they had a certification, and I was like, I'm going for that certification. So I had the pleasure to go to the Arizona and the Mexico border, and that just completely opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I have to thank Westy for that. It was hard. It was one of the most hard 14 days of my life, but I think I understand in a way that I now can help my clients, because most of my clients that I help and I advocate for came to that desert, took that journey, and so now I can connect more on their level. When they tell me their story, I can not only imagine, but I know. I saw it. I walked the desert. I sat in the shelters with the women and the children. I saw their pain. I heard their pain. And so when they come to my office to seek for help with VAWA or U visa, or even shelter, or even how to get a restraining order, I could advocate for them because I know that they're afraid, one, because of their status, two, they don't know the system as much as I do because I walked through that system painfully and slowly. And so it's a great pleasure to be here today to share my story, not that, but to let you know that if you can do anything to help, even like Wesley said, open your door, get to know your neighbors, because you can learn so much from your coworkers, neighbors, and what I learned is that you never know who you're sitting next to. You know, you may judge someone for their character, or who they are, or their accent, or how they speak the language, how well they speak the language. But at the end of the day, everyone has a story, and that story can be painful and can be impactful. So thank you so much for having me today.
I would love to take a couple of questions for our panelists here. And Westy and Candy are still over there, and our amazing speakers here. So if anyone has a question or two, we will be able to take some. Yeah, so I think there's a woman right here. If you could stand up or speak loudly.
I teach at Roxbury Community College, and I am the daughter of a man who was here for 17 years as an undocumented worker, having gotten caught in the nativism of the 1920s. And I have to say, I am tremendously heartened by this incredible outpouring of people, but I am very aware, given the kind of work I have done, to what extent resources are lacking in this progressive, rich state of Massachusetts to support immigrants, including English language training, particularly for adults. And I wonder, and resources are lacking, for example, in the public higher education system. The community colleges are penny pinching all over the place. I wonder specifically what kinds of things we can do if we want to get involved.
Do any of our panelists want to take that? There's a microphone. Eva Malone.
Thank you so much for your question. One of the things that MIRA does, and we are a coalition of 150 groups across the states, it's advocacy that includes budget advocacy as well as legislative advocacy. So my advice is join MIRA, join our groups, and let's work together to expand the budget. The need is much greater than what resources are available. Massachusetts invests about $37 million altogether, but that includes adult basic education, citizenship, healthcare, domestic violence, and it's not enough for over 1 million foreign-born in our Commonwealth. So the answer is, let's work together. It's an election year, coming up, and let's make immigration, and let's make integration and resources for Massachusetts a priority. That's the answer. As I said, when Aurora passed in 1986, Massachusetts created a fund, but it's time to expand that because of the contribution of immigrants and because integration and investment in our future. So my answer is join MIRA, be part of the budget advocacy. We are working at that, and we have a lot of work to do. As far as I remember, the waiting list for ESL classes was like 16,000 people. So the need is greater, the demand is greater, and also the demand for us to better include immigrants and provide the resources for them is really great. Thank you.
Let me just add a couple thoughts. Next election coming up is in Brookline on May 2nd. But nationally is 2018. The last election, Mr. You-know-who lost by 3 million votes. So that means that there's a huge base of people in this country who don't really go along with what's going on, as well as those people who have been woken up by the terrible things that have come out of the administration in the last 60 days. So, my suggestion is not just for you to go out and vote, but figure out some ways that we can get our friends who didn't vote, who don't vote in off-year elections, because that's when the offices that can do the most damage in terms of funding of social service programs at the local level and other things are decided. I don't have any particular ideas. I mean, I have a lot of ideas, but the point is, I think we need to make sure that we see this as a political issue that needs to be carried out in the next couple of years in the off-year elections, and get all of your friends, not just you, but your friends who haven't voted, who should have voted, to take this seriously.
Just to start, in terms of the advocacy, I just wanted to mention that we have a big advocacy day on April 4th. We expect 2,000 people. That is, April 5th at 10 a.m. Try to come there before 10 a.m., but it's pushing for a budget that will support Massachusetts, and it's supporting also the Safe Community and another dozen of bills. So please show up on April 5th at 10 a.m. at the State House at the Hall of Flags.
Can I say something, please? I gotta be rude. I'm gonna be rude and take the floor just for 1 minute. We talk about things that are happening in other communities, in other parts of the world. We have to look at what's happening right here in Brookline, what's been happening for the last 40 years in terms of, how you've treated black people in your town, and it's been ignored. Okay, I'm an example. I won't give you specifics, but you have your police chase and harass and arrest black people on sight. If you look at the article in Boston Magazine, October 2016, it says, does Brookline have a problem with black people? It's been ignored, and it's been ignored by the ACLU, okay? I know for at least the last decade. We have to look at how we deal with black people in this community. It is tragic, okay? It goes to the Board of Selectmen, okay? We are human beings. We deserve to be treated and accepted as human beings. I know for a fact from my own personal experiences, we have to stop sweeping this under the rug.
So we're actually out of time for our last question. And I'm going to let you know that after this, we can continue to speak. We will have a reception downstairs with light refreshments that were donated from our sister city group. And we have a number of information tables with members from those organizations there. I do want to say this statement here myself, thank you. That I am a first-generation immigrant here in the U.S. and a mother of 3, and I have advocated on the State House as well and testified as well as a commissioner on the Asian American Commission or on the State Women's Commission. So I think I also understand the plight of an immigrant, and I appreciate the work that the ACLU, MIRA, and other coalitions have done. I do also want to say that I made a conscious choice to move and live here in Brookline. And I am hopeful that the resources in our town that we are all working together. I am heartened by the standing room crowd here that we care, and those who could not make it wanted to see this. So I appreciate and applaud Big for giving up their time to record this so that other people can be very educated about this important and complex issue. A couple things that were raised that I just want to make sure I address is someone had mentioned supports for like ESL, for example. I know that our library provides ESL support and working groups and conversation groups, that our Brookline Housing Authority also similarly does the same as well. Eva mentioned voting, and so did Bernard. I know our League of Women Voters is here looking at nonpartisan ways to increase civic engagement in voting. There are a number of groups throughout the town that are looking to make you look and see someone else as your neighbor. I know Westy and Candida had said, you know, open up your door and look and see who your neighbor is next door. The library is doing that challenge right now with Jean Yang, who's coming to speak in April. Reading Without Walls. Read something else that's different, that's not what you normally read. Read about someone else that's different and it looks different from you. I know the Brookline Asian American Family Network has done a number of programs that look just at that. What does it mean to be Asian American in Brookline? We've had programs looking at the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I was heartened that Eva mentioned. We have, you know, another screening coming up with Brookline Hub at the Coolidge Corner Theater on the Holocaust witness survivors and those who lived in Brookline and survived the Holocaust to tell their tale here to us. And that is very moving. So I think there is a lot going on in Brookline, and we are all passionate in trying to do the right and hopefully the right thing. And I'm heartened by neighbors. I know some of you here in the room, it was exciting when you got your citizenship. And I know I remember seeing pictures of just that with some of my neighbors. So I am heartened. I also want to say that Brookline Sister City Group really kind of helped convene it kind of through Richard Seegan. And you know, a quote that comes from that, and I think it represents so much more than just the Sister City Group, is that Brookline Kesselwaukee Sister City Project represents the very best of people in 2 communities of the world, learning about each other and believing that with generosity and resolve, good things are possible. And with regards to all we are striving here to do about immigrant and refugee rights, I think that applies. I think if we can all together try to work to make positive, effective change, it can happen, is I'm hopeful, right? That's all we can be, and work hard. So, because we are out of time, and I apologize, I'm hopeful we'll stay for just a few moments, but we will have a reception downstairs where people can talk and continue this conversation. So again, many thanks to all of our sponsors, our esteemed panel. I'm so thankful for your time. Again, please consider donating to ACLU with your time, your energy, MIRA, as well as Westy and the Immigrant Immigration. Thank you.